Inside a quiet diner on a snowy night, a young man struck his aging veteran father. The sound echoed like thunder across the frozen silence. No one moved, no one spoke, until a stranger walked in. Ethan Cole, a Navy SEAL lost in the storm, and his loyal German shepherd stood watching. What happened next would expose corruption buried deep within the town, awaken faith long forgotten, and test the strength of love and redemption. This is the story of a fallen son, a broken father, and a soldier who became their miracle. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of faith and second chances. The first snow of December fell quietly over the small Montana town of Haven Creek, blanketing the pine roofs and lonely streetlights in a soft silver hush. Inside the Pine Diner, the warmth of frying bacon and black coffee clung to the air, mingling with the faint hum of an old jukebox that hadn't worked right since the late 80s. It was the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time. Worn linoleum floors, cracked red booths, and regulars who carried more stories than teeth. At the corner booth by the frosted window sat George Miller, a 72-year-old veteran whose life had been shaped by both war and silence. His posture was straight, out of habit more than pride, and his large, work-worn hands cradled a chipped coffee mug as though it were a keepsake from a gentler world. His once broad shoulders had thinned, but his face still bore the angular strength of a man who had known command, cheekbones hard as the Montana stone, a jawline etched deep with quiet resolve. His gray hair was combed neatly, though a few rebellious strands refused to obey discipline. A thin scar traced the edge of his temple, a relic from Vietnam, one of those invisible marks that never truly left. Yet it wasn't war that haunted him most. It was what came after. His wife had died 10 years ago. His friends had scattered to nursing homes or graves, and his only son, Ryan, had become a stranger in the same bloodline. George sipped his coffee slowly, staring at the snowfall outside. To him, the falling snow always sounded like forgiveness, quiet, unassuming, and far too late. The bell above the diner door rang, breaking his thought. A rush of cold air and whiskey breath swept in. Ryan Miller, 28, staggered inside. His once athletic frame had softened from sleepless nights and bad habits. Dark stubble shadowed a jawline that could have been handsome, if not for the bruised exhaustion beneath his eyes. He had his father's height, but none of his steadiness. His brown hair was unkempt, his leather jacket reeked of smoke and desperation, and his hands shook, not from the cold, but from withdrawal and guilt. Gambling had eaten through every paycheck he ever earned, and now it had come for what little dignity he had left. "Dad," Ryan's voice cracked across the room, drawing glances from the few late diners. "Dad, I need some cash. Just a little. I swear I'll pay you back." George didn't look up at first. He took a breath that trembled slightly before answering. "You've said that before, son. The answer's the same." Ryan slammed his hand on the table. "You don't understand. It's not just me. People are after me. I can't fix this without your help." His voice was jagged with fear, but under it lay anger, the kind that builds when love curdles into blame. George finally met his son's eyes, and for a moment, Ryan flinched. There was no rage in his father's gaze, only weary disappointment, which somehow hurt worse. "I fought men with guns, Ryan," George said softly. "But the fight that matters is the one you're running from. You can't gamble your soul and expect someone else to pay the debt." The words cut deeper than Ryan expected. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but shame burned behind his eyes. He thought of his mother, how she used to call him her good boy when he built birdhouses in the backyard. That boy was long gone. In his place stood a man who didn't know who he was anymore. His hand trembled as he reached for the old man's wallet lying beside the plate of half-eaten pie. George's hand shot out, firm, calm, the same hand that had once steadied rifles in the jungle. "Don't do that." Ryan's face twisted. "You think you're better than me, old man?" "No," George whispered. "I just wish you'd believed you could be." Something snapped. Ryan's open palm lashed out, a reflex of frustration more than intent, and struck his father's face. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. The jukebox fizzled to silence. George stumbled backward, his coffee mug shattering against the floor. His cheek stung, but the greater pain was in his chest, a hollow ache where pride used to live. At the counter, Lily Carter, the diner's waitress, froze. She was 26, tall and willowy, with chestnut hair tied in a messy bun and a kind of fragile strength in her blue eyes. She had come to Haven Creek 2 years earlier after leaving behind a failed engagement and a city that never missed her. Working here was supposed to be temporary, a place to breathe. But in that moment, as she saw the old man fall, something inside her flared. Anger, compassion, maybe both. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and discreetly hit record. Ryan stood panting, horror dawning on his face as if he had just realized what he'd done. "Dad, George didn't speak. He pressed a napkin to his lip, where a thin line of blood had appeared. Around them, customers sat frozen, caught between fear and decency. No one moved to help. The bell above the door chimed again. A gust of cold air swept through, carrying with it a quiet authority. Ethan Cole stepped in. He was in his late 30s, tall and solid, with the unmistakable bearing of a man trained for danger. His short-cropped hair was peppered with gray, and a neatly kept beard framed a face that seemed carved from stone. His piercing blue eyes swept the room in an instant. He didn't need to ask what had happened. The tension was written in every face. At his side padded Shadow, a large German shepherd, 5 years old, with sleek black and tan fur and the calm precision of a creature born to protect. Ethan had been a Navy SEAL for 12 years before a roadside blast in Kandahar ended his service. Since then, he'd traveled the back roads of America, trying to find something worth protecting again. He hadn't expected to find it here. Ryan turned toward the newcomer, still trembling. "What are you looking at?" Ethan's voice was calm, low, but edged with command. "A mistake you don't want to make twice." He stepped between Ryan and George, his movements measured, predatory in their control. Shadow followed, positioning himself between the two men, muscles tense but silent. Ryan's defiance faltered. "This isn't your business." Ethan met his eyes. "You made it everyone's business when you hit a man who can't hit back." Lily finally exhaled, still recording. George looked up at the stranger standing over him and saw something in Ethan's expression, a steadiness that reminded him of the brothers he'd lost in war, the kind of man who stood up when others froze. Outside, the snowfall thickened, pressing against the diner's windows like an audience holding its breath. Ryan backed away, muttering curses, and stormed out into the storm, leaving the door swinging open and cold wind whipping through the diner. Ethan helped George to his feet. "You okay, sir?" George nodded faintly, his voice thin. "I've been worse." Lily approached, her phone still in her hand. "I recorded it," she said softly. "He can't get away with that." George looked at her, then at Ethan, then down at Shadow, who was watching the door with unblinking focus. "Maybe," he said, "this winter still has a bit of justice left in it." Outside, Ryan's figure blurred into the snow, swallowed by the white silence. By morning, the storm had swallowed Haven Creek whole. The diner's neon sign flickered weakly under the heavy snow, its hum fading into the howling wind that swept down from the Bitterroot Mountains. Inside, Pine Diner smelled of burnt toast and silence. The news of the assault had already rippled through town. In places like Haven Creek, nothing stayed secret for long. Yet behind the counters and cold coffee mugs, people whispered not about Ryan's violence, but about who had intervened. "The stranger with the dog," they murmured, moved like he'd seen war. Ethan Cole stood by the window, watching the snowdrifts pile high. His jacket was folded neatly over a chair, revealing a faded tattoo of an anchor entwined with angel wings across his forearm. It was a memory etched in skin, the mark of men who had served and lost more than they spoke of. He had slept little, keeping an eye on George through the night. Shadow, his German shepherd, now lay curled near the heater, one ear always tilted toward the door, instinct sharp even in rest. George sat at the same booth as the night before, his cheek faintly swollen, though he pretended not to notice. His thoughts wandered to his son. Ryan's face, angry, broken, terrified, haunted him like an echo he couldn't silence. Guilt and pride warred inside him. Perhaps he had been too stern, or perhaps love had turned him blind to how far Ryan had fallen. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Sheriff Tom Rayner stepped in, brushing the snow from his brown leather jacket. He was in his early 50s, tall but soft around the middle, his once square jaw now hidden beneath a graying beard, trimmed too neatly to be trusted. His uniform was clean, his badge polished, but his eyes, small, calculating, the color of tarnished brass, gave away a man who measured justice by convenience. Years ago, Rayner had been an honest deputy under a righteous sheriff, but power and proximity to money had eroded that integrity, like rust eating through iron. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Mornin', Mr. Miller," he said, voice too smooth. "Heard there was a bit of a scuffle here last night." Ethan turned slightly, his stance relaxed but alert. "If that's what you call a son hitting his father," he replied, calm as ice. Rayner chuckled. "Families fight, always have, always will." His gaze drifted toward Lily, who was standing behind the counter polishing silverware with more force than necessary. "You recorded it, right, miss? Maybe we should have a look at that phone." Lily froze. "It's evidence," she said quietly. "You can see it when the proper people ask for it." Rayner's smile tightened. "Well, I'm the proper people here, sweetheart." Ethan's voice cut in again, firm but steady. "She doesn't need to show you anything without a warrant." The sheriff turned to face him fully now, sizing up the stranger. "And you are?" "Ethan Cole, former Navy SEAL. I was here when it happened." The title made Rayner hesitate. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not respect, but calculation. "SEAL, huh? Impressive. But this isn't a battlefield, son. This is my town." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "That man's assault on his father deserves a report. I haven't seen one." Rayner shifted his weight, hands resting casually on his belt. "Well, Mr. Cole, the thing is, no one's pressing charges. Isn't that right, George?" George's fingers tightened around his mug. The old instinct to avoid trouble rose in him, the soldier's habit of obeying authority. He looked up slowly, torn. "Ryan's my boy," he said, voice low. "He's lost, but he's still my son." "That settles it," Rayner said cheerfully, tipping his hat as if justice had been served. Lily's eyes flared. That's not justice. That's cowardice. The sheriff's smile disappeared. Watch yourself, miss. Folks who stir trouble tend to find it. He lingered on her a moment longer than was proper, then turned to leave. Before he could reach the door, Shadow stood up, silent, watchful. His dark eyes locked on the man. Rayner stopped, uneasy, then pushed through the door into the snow. Ethan watched him go, jaw tight. He's covering for someone, he muttered. Ryan? Lily asked. Maybe, Ethan replied, or whoever Ryan owes money to. He looked at George. Do you know who your son's been mixed up with? George hesitated, then nodded slowly. A man named Rake Jensen. Owns a gambling hall out past the old mill. Ethan frowned. He'd heard the name before, a former oil worker turned loan shark. Rumor was, Rake had bought off half the county, the sheriff included. Later that afternoon, as the storm calmed to a whisper, Ethan left the diner to clear his head. He walked down Main Street, Shadow trotting beside him, paws leaving perfect prints in the slush. The town was eerily quiet. Even the Christmas decorations hanging from lampposts looked weary, drooping under snow. Halfway down the block, a black SUV idled near the curb. Its tinted window rolled down just enough for Ethan to glimpse Rake Jensen. He was in his 40s, rugged but well-dressed, with salt and pepper hair slicked back and a face both charming and cruel. His eyes were ice blue, sharp as broken glass, and his smile could convince a priest to sin. The faint white scar across his neck hinted at a knife that had once come too close. Well, well, Rake drawled, voice smooth as bourbon. You're the soldier everyone's talking about. Ethan stopped, hands in his coat pockets. Depends who's asking. Just a concerned citizen, Rake said. That old man you're helping, his boy owes me money, big money. Now I'm a reasonable man. But if folks keep meddling in business that ain't theirs. His gaze shifted toward Shadow. Even good dogs can get hurt. Shadow's low growl cut through the cold. Ethan took one step closer, his tone soft but edged with warning. You threaten him again, and I'll show you how unreasonable I can be. Rake chuckled, unbothered. Careful, hero. This town doesn't belong to you. The SUV pulled away, tires hissing on ice, leaving behind exhaust that hung in the air like a ghost. When Ethan returned to the diner, Lily was waiting by the door. She looked tired, worry creasing the corners of her eyes. George went home, she said. He said he needed time to think. Ethan nodded. Good. He should stay inside tonight. What about Ryan? She asked. Ethan glanced toward the darkened street where the snow had begun to fall again in soft, endless flakes. If the sheriff won't protect this town, he said quietly, then I will. Shadow brushed against his leg, tail low, ears alert. Outside, somewhere beyond the mist and quiet, trouble was brewing, the kind that never stayed buried long in a place like Haven Creek. And as the last diner light flickered out, Ethan felt it deep in his bones. This wasn't just a family's problem anymore. It was a war waiting to be fought. The snow had settled into a deceptive calm over Haven Creek, turning the streets into a white canvas that hid the scars beneath. It was the kind of morning that looked peaceful from a distance. Children playing near the frozen fountain, the smell of coffee drifting from the bakery. But beneath that surface, tension hummed like a power line about to snap. Ethan Cole knew the stillness was a lie. He had seen this kind of quiet before. The lull before a storm on the battlefield. Shadow padded silently beside him as he walked toward George Miller's small wooden house on the outskirts of town, boots crunching through ice. The dog's fur glistened in the pale light, breath steaming like smoke. Every few steps, Shadow stopped, sniffing the air, alert, disciplined, a soldier in his own right. Ethan reached the porch and knocked gently. The door creaked open to reveal George, still in his flannel shirt from the day before, eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. The bruise on his cheek had deepened to a dark purple. "Morning," George said hoarsely, his voice cracking like old wood. "Didn't expect company this early." Ethan gave a faint nod. "Didn't expect to be here this long." He stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of pine and old tobacco, the walls lined with photos. A younger George in uniform, a smiling woman holding a baby that could only be Ryan. Ethan studied the pictures quietly. "You had a good family," he said. George followed his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Once, before war and whiskey took their turns on me, and life on him." His tone was soft but heavy with regret. Ethan understood the weight of that silence. He'd carried his own ghosts too long to judge another man's. Before they could speak further, the sound of tires crunching outside made both men turn. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, the emblem of Haven Creek glinting dully through the frost. The passenger door opened, and out stepped Deputy Sarah Weller, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp cheekbones and dark auburn hair tucked neatly beneath her hat. Her green eyes were clear but tired, the kind of tired that comes from fighting battles you can't win. She had joined law enforcement straight out of college, once full of hope and moral fire. But under Sheriff Rayner's command, that fire had dimmed into cautious obedience. She approached the porch slowly, hands visible, posture non-threatening. "Mr. Miller, Mr. Cole?" she greeted politely. "Sheriff asked me to check in. Said there were concerns about last night's incident." Ethan caught the hesitation in her tone. "Concerns or orders to keep people quiet?" he asked. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. "I just do my job." Shadow moved to the threshold, tail low but eyes focused on her belt where her firearm rested. "Your dog's sharp," she said softly. "Trained to read people," Ethan replied. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, Ethan saw a flicker of conflict behind her professionalism. "If you're really here to check on George," he continued, "then do it. But if you're here to clean up Rayner's mess, you might want to rethink your badge." Sarah exhaled, the cloud of her breath rising like smoke. "I didn't come here to fight you, Mr. Cole, but you're stirring a hornet's nest you don't understand." She looked past him toward George. "Your son's name came up in a call this morning. Something about a fight near the old mill." George's heart sank. "Ryan? He's with Rake Jensen's men now," she said quietly. "Sheriff told us to stand down. Said it's a private matter." The disgust in her voice betrayed her loyalty to truth, not to Rayner. Ethan's jaw tensed. Then it's not private anymore. An hour later, Ethan drove toward the edge of town. The mill stood like a skeleton in the snow. Broken windows, rusted machinery, the ghosts of industry long gone. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes locked forward. As they approached, Ethan saw two men smoking near the loading dock, both thick-jacketed and broad. One was Vic Hanley, a local mechanic known for doing Rake's dirty jobs. He was heavy-set with greasy blonde hair and a scar cutting across his nose. The other, Darren Cole, was lean, nervous, the kind of man who followed orders because fear was easier than thought. They laughed about something until they noticed the truck. "Morning, gentlemen," Ethan said as he stepped out, voice casual. "Seen a kid named Ryan Miller?" Vic grinned, showing a chipped tooth. Depends who's asking. Ethan gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Someone who doesn't like bullies. Before Vic could reply, Shadow barked sharply, once, loud and commanding. From inside the mill came muffled shouting. Ethan moved fast, sliding along the wall, gun holstered, but hand ready. He peered through a broken window and saw Ryan kneeling on the floor, surrounded by two of Rake's men. One held a bat, the other was rifling through his wallet. Ryan's lip was split, his face swollen. "You don't pay, we take something worth more," one thug said. Ethan didn't wait. He signaled Shadow. The dog leapt through the side entrance in a blur of black and tan, growling with a sound that froze both men mid-move. Ethan followed, kicking the door open. "That's enough!" The thugs turned. One swung the bat. Shadow lunged, clamping onto his arm with precision. The second man reached for a knife but froze when Ethan's gun leveled at his chest. "Drop it," Ethan said coldly. The knife clattered to the ground. Within seconds, both men were on their knees, trembling. Ryan looked up, disbelief mixing with shame. Why did you come?" Ethan holstered his weapon. "Because your father still believes you're worth saving. Don't make him wrong." Minutes later, they left the mill. Ryan leaned against the truck, shivering despite the heat. He was thinner than before, the hollows beneath his eyes deep and dark. "You should have let them finish me," he muttered. Ethan looked at him. "Your dad fought for people he didn't even know. You think he'd quit on his own son?" Ryan didn't answer. Shadow rested his head against Ryan's knee, and for a brief moment, something cracked in the young man's hardened shell. He reached down, tentative, to pet the dog. When they returned to town, Deputy Sarah was waiting near George's porch. She looked relieved and worried. "Rayner's furious," she warned. "He says you've interfered with law enforcement and escalated tensions." Ethan smirked. "Guess I'm doing something right." Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "He's calling Rake tonight. They're planning something. Please, be careful. I can only protect you so far." Ethan studied her face. The sincerity, the fear. "Then maybe it's time we stopped playing defense." He glanced at George's house where Ryan sat inside, staring out the window at the snow. "This town's been quiet too long," Ethan said. "It's time someone made noise." Outside, night settled again over Haven Creek, cold and heavy. But somewhere deep in that silence, the first sound of change was beginning. The heartbeat of men and women too tired to stay afraid. The sky above Haven Creek hung heavy with snow clouds, the kind that muted sound and blurred the edges of everything. By dusk, the small town looked almost peaceful, the streets empty except for the faint glow of Christmas lights trembling in the wind. But under that stillness, fear moved quietly. Sheriff Tom Rayner sat in his office, the blinds half closed, the single desk lamp painting his face in sharp lines of yellow and shadow. His beard was thicker now, a poor disguise for the worry crawling under his skin. Across from him sat Rake Jensen, still immaculate in his tailored coat, boots polished even in this weather. His cold blue eyes studied Rayner like a predator judging a wounded animal. "You're losing control of your town, Sheriff," Rake said smoothly, voice soft but venomous. "First that seal shows up, now your deputy's whispering to him. You let this fester, and soon everyone starts believing in heroes again." Rayner rubbed his temple. "You think I like this? The kid was supposed to scare the old man, that's all. Now Cole's turned it into a crusade." Rake leaned back, a faint smirk cutting across his face. Then you better end it before dawn. Make it look like an accident. Across town, Ethan Cole sat at George Miller's kitchen table, studying a hand-drawn map of Haven Creek. His jaw was tight, the dim light catching the faint scar along his cheek, a relic of another fight, another lifetime. Beside him, Deputy Sarah Weller leaned forward, her auburn hair tied back, green eyes sharp with focus. "If Rayner's meeting with Rake tonight, it'll be at the logging depot," she said quietly. "It's isolated and off the record. No patrols go near there after dark." Ethan nodded. "Then that's where we'll go." Shadow lay at his feet, ears twitching as if sensing the tension. George watched from the doorway, a blanket draped over his shoulders. "You don't have to do this, son," he said softly. Ethan looked up, his voice steady. "If we don't stop them now, they'll own this town forever." Sarah hesitated. "We can't go in guns blazing. They'll spin it as an attack on law enforcement. We need proof." Ethan's gaze moved toward the small recorder she'd placed on the table, a slim, black device with a blinking red light. "Then we get their confession," he said. Meanwhile, at the Pine Diner, Lily Carter was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door rang. Two men entered, shaking snow from their coats. She recognized one of them, Vic Hanley, Rake's enforcer with the scarred nose and mean grin. The other was new, Mason Boyd, tall and wiry with sunken eyes and a crooked smile that didn't reach his face. His hands were marked with tattoos, the kind earned in prison. Lily's grip tightened on the rag. "Kitchen's closed," she said, trying to sound firm. Vic laughed. "We ain't here for pie, sweetheart." He leaned closer, his breath sour with beer. "You like filming people, don't you? Maybe you should keep that camera off tonight." Mason slid a folded piece of paper across the counter, a photo of George's house. "Tell your friends to stay quiet, or the old man gets a midnight visitor." They turned to leave. Lily's voice trembled but didn't break. "If you touch them, the whole town will know." Vic chuckled without turning back. "That's the idea." When they were gone, Lily locked the door, her hands shaking. She grabbed her phone and called Ethan. "They're coming for George," she said. By the time Ethan and Sarah reached the road near the depot, the wind had turned vicious. The trees groaned, branches heavy with snow. Ethan parked the truck a quarter-mile away and cut the lights. "You sure your radio's secure?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Encrypted channel. If we get caught, they can't trace it." She checked her weapon, standard issue Glock, while Ethan adjusted the small body cam clipped to his vest. "Ready?" she whispered. Ethan glanced down at Shadow. "You know what to do, buddy." The dog gave a low growl, almost like an answer. They moved through the dark, silent except for the crunch of snow. Ahead, the depot's floodlights glowed dimly, outlining two figures near a truck, Rayner and Rake. Hidden behind stacked logs, Sarah turned on the recorder. "You sure you want to do this?" she whispered. Ethan nodded once. They listened. Rayner's voice drifted through the cold. "You said no blood. I can't cover another body." Rake's reply was low, dangerous. "It's not blood, it's insurance. Cole dies a hero in the storm, the old man disappears, and your badge stays clean." Ethan's eyes hardened. He moved to step forward, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "We need the full confession," she mouthed. Then headlights cut across the snow. Vic's truck pulled in, with Mason beside him. "They're bringing muscle," Sarah whispered. Inside the truck, Vic was laughing. "That seal thinks he's some kind of savior. Let's see how tough he is when the snow buries him." Rake turned toward Rayner. You heard him. Do it. The sheriff's hand trembled near his gun. Ethan took a deep breath. Now, he whispered. He stepped from cover, gun raised. Sheriff Rayner, drop your weapon. The scene froze. Shadow leapt forward, barking, circling Rake's men with calculated precision. Rayner's eyes widened. Cole, he began, but before he could finish, Mason reached for his rifle. A single shot cracked through the air. Sarah fired first, her aim deadly. Mason dropped, snow blooming red beneath him. Chaos erupted. Vic charged, but Ethan moved faster, tackling him into the snow. They wrestled, fists landing hard. Vic swung wild. Ethan countered with brutal precision honed by years of combat. Within moments, Vic lay face down, breathless. Rake reached for his own weapon, but Shadow lunged, knocking it from his hand. The dog's growl rumbled like thunder. Rake stumbled backward, slipping on ice, and Ethan leveled his gun. It's over, Ethan said. Rake sneered, blood at the corner of his mouth. You can't stop what's already built. Ethan stepped closer. Maybe not, but it ends here. Sirens pierced the wind. Backup, summoned by Sarah's radio signal. She looked at Rayner, whose face was pale and broken. You can still make this right, she told him. He stared at her, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. Finally, he nodded, whispering, I'll testify. As the cruisers arrived, lights flashing blue against the snow, Ethan stood silently beside Shadow. Sarah approached him, eyes glistening with relief. You did it, she said softly. Ethan shook his head. We all did. Behind them, the dawn began to break, faint gold spilling over the horizon, painting the frozen town in fragile light. Back at George's house, Lily waited on the porch with coffee trembling in her hands. When Ethan pulled up, she smiled through tears. They said you'd never come back, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Guess they were wrong. George stepped out, Ryan beside him, both silent but standing together. As the first sunlight touched the snow, Haven Creek felt lighter, as if the whole town had exhaled. And for the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. The courthouse of Haven County stood against the pale winter sky like a relic of another age, its brick walls dusted with snow and its flag barely stirring in the cold wind. It had been 3 weeks since the shootout at the depot. The town had begun to thaw, not from the weather, but from truth finally breaking through years of silence. Inside, the courtroom was filled. Old farmers, young clerks, widows wrapped in heavy coats. All had come to see justice long delayed. Sheriff Tom Rayner, once the symbol of authority, now sat at the defendant's table. The proud line of his jaw had softened. The stubble on his cheeks had turned gray, his eyes hollow but no longer defiant. In that emptiness, there was something that almost looked like remorse. Across the aisle sat Ethan Cole, dressed not in his SEAL uniform but in a plain dark suit, posture straight, expression unreadable. His dog Shadow rested at his feet, the German shepherd's thick winter coat gleaming under the light. Near him were George Miller, his arm still bandaged from the attack, and Ryan, his son, sober now, clean-shaven, hair trimmed short, his face pale with guilt but steady with resolve. The trial had been long and tense. Rake Jensen had already fled the state after being granted bail, but his network had crumbled under the mountain of evidence. The recording Sarah captured that night had gone viral, sparking outrage far beyond Haven Creek. Now, the people demanded accountability. Judge Margaret Holcomb, a woman in her 60s with silver hair neatly pinned into a bun and a gaze sharp enough to pierce stone, presided over the case. Her reputation was one of integrity, shaped by decades of navigating small-town politics with wisdom and steel. As she adjusted her glasses and looked over the files before her, the courtroom fell into a reverent hush. "Sheriff Rayner," she began, her voice firm but not without empathy. "You have served this town for over 20 years, but in that time, you betrayed the very oath meant to protect it. You allowed greed and fear to corrupt your judgment. However, you also came forward with testimony that exposed greater crimes. The court recognizes this cooperation." She paused, glancing toward Ethan. "Justice must be firm but not blind." Her gavel struck once. "Thomas Rayner, you are hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal custody with the possibility of parole after 6 for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power." A murmur ran through the room. Rayner closed his eyes. No one cheered, no one jeered. It wasn't victory, it was closure. As the guards led him away, he turned briefly toward Ethan and George. His voice was barely a whisper. "Tell your boy, don't make my mistakes." Outside, the sky had opened again, snow falling gently over the courthouse steps. Sarah Weller joined Ethan as he walked down the stairs. She wore a gray wool coat that matched the streaks of silver beginning to show in her auburn hair. Her expression was calm but thoughtful. "It's over," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "For the town, maybe. For some of us, not yet." He looked toward Ryan standing beside his father. The young man's breath steamed in the cold air, his hands trembling slightly, not from the chill, but from the weight of what he owed. That evening, at the Pine Diner, the same place where all of it began, a quiet celebration took place. The neon sign flickered above the frosted windows, the smell of coffee and fried dough filling the air. Lily Carter moved between tables, her face brighter than it had been in months. Her long brown hair, usually tied back, was loose tonight, brushing her shoulders. She smiled easily now, something she'd forgotten how to do. George sat in his usual booth, cane leaning against the wall. His weathered face, lined from years of both war and grief, softened when Ryan slid into the seat across from him. The silence between them was fragile, like thin ice. Then Ryan spoke, voice low but steady. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to make things right. I joined a recovery program in Denver. They said I could help other vets with trauma, guys like you, guys like me." George looked at him for a long moment. The anger, the disappointment, all those years of silent pain seemed to flicker and fade. Finally, he nodded. "You do that, son. You make it mean something." His voice cracked slightly. "That's all the forgiveness you need." They sat quietly, the sound of laughter and clinking coffee cups around them. Near the counter, Ethan leaned against the wall, watching them. Sarah approached with 2 mugs. "Coffee?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "You know me too well." They sat together, shoulders brushing slightly, a rare softness in Ethan's hardened demeanor. She studied him for a moment. "You thinking of leaving again?" He hesitated. "I was, but maybe Haven Creek still needs watching." She chuckled. "Or maybe you do." Their laughter was quiet, but it felt real. Outside, Shadow lay curled beneath the diner's porch light, his breath forming soft clouds in the cold. A small child approached, Ellie Turner, 6 years old, daughter of one of the local waitresses. Her blonde curls peeked out from under a red wool hat. She giggled as she petted Shadow's fur. "Good boy," she whispered, offering him a piece of her cookie. The dog accepted it gently, tail wagging. George, watching from inside, smiled. "That dog's more popular than the mayor," he said. Later that night, Ethan walked home through the snow-covered street. The lights of Haven Creek glowed warm against the cold, every window flickering with life again. He paused on the bridge overlooking the frozen river. The stars above seemed impossibly bright. He closed his eyes, his thoughts quiet for the first time in years. "You still out there, God?" he murmured. "Because I think we finally saw one of your miracles." The wind stirred softly, and for a moment he thought he heard his mother's voice, gentle, steady, whispering back, "You did, son. You were part of it." When he returned home, Shadow trotted in beside him. The fire was lit, the cabin warm. He hung his coat and poured 2 cups of tea, one for himself, one for memory. On the wall hung a photo taken just days before. The diner, the town smiling, Ryan and George together again. Sarah had taken it. It wasn't just a picture. It was proof that light had returned to Haven Creek. And as the snow fell quietly outside, Ethan whispered a small prayer, not for victory or forgiveness, but for peace. The kind that stays even when the storm passes. Because sometimes God's greatest miracles aren't the ones that change the world, but the ones that change a single heart. Sometimes miracles don't come as thunder or fire. They come quietly, like snow falling on an old man's porch, or a lost son finding his way home. In Haven Creek, God's hand didn't move mountains. It softened hearts. He used a soldier, a dog, and the courage of ordinary people to remind us that light still exists, even in the coldest winters of the soul. If you're watching this, maybe you've faced your own kind of storm. Maybe someone you love has drifted away, or maybe you've forgotten how to forgive. But tonight, let this story remind you, no heart is too far gone, no life too broken for God to mend. He works through our kindness, through the courage to speak truth, through the small mercies that ripple farther than we can see. That's the miracle. Not that pain disappears, but that love endures. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can feel its light too. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and who you're praying for tonight. Subscribe for more stories of hope, faith, and redemption. Because every life, every act of love, is a miracle waiting to be seen. May God bless you, your family, and everyone brave enough to believe that goodness still wins.